Hello. Okay, I hope you're ready. Pen and paper, and off we go. So, what do all of these things have in common? A camel, humans, seals, meerkats, dogs, baboons? Well, the answer is they're all mammals. We're a mammal, just like this. But how much do you feel like a koala? Or an elephant? A bear? I wonder what we have in common and what's different. So, there are two key characteristics to being a mammal, and they are, you ready? Hair and mammary glands. Now, hair is going to be either the stuff that you can see, or hair could be things like sensory hairs, protective hair, or even fur across the body of your dog or cat. The big thing is that we're part of the class Mammalia, meaning that we're mammals, right? And what makes us mammals? Well, the two key characteristics being hair and mammary glands. Mammary glands are the teats, the udders, the breast tissue, something that produces milk for the purposes of nourishing their young. And this term that I need you to know is called lactation. Lactation is the functionality of producing milk for nourishing the offspring. So let's have a look at this image down the bottom here. And you'll notice that if we look at this picture, that you can see where we branch off, and the key characteristics that branch us off are hair and mammary glands. But we share similarities with birds and reptiles and fish and so forth. If we go all the way back, you'll notice that we have a shared characteristic, that we have an ancestral caudate. What does caudate mean? It means that it have a backbone. So that's very important to know. So a caudate means that you have a backbone. Okay. Hopefully you know this one. Oh, what does it mean to be a caudate? So let's talk about the function of hair. So the hair has lots of functions, but we'll talk about some, and we'll think about some of it in terms of mammalian examples, and maybe in us too. Insulation. When I think about insulation, I think about a polar bear. Well, it lives in a very, very cold environment, and yet it doesn't put on a jacket. It doesn't wrap itself up in blankets. It's perfectly fine because its hair helps to insulate against the cold, and it traps the body heat against its body so that it doesn't affect it. Well, do we have anything like that? Well, yes, we do. Our head, right? Our head is covered with hair. In fact, we lose 20% of our body heat from our head, which is why maybe as a kid, if you lived in a cold environment, I know my mum sure did. She was like, put your hat on when you go outside to play. And so I would put a hat on to help insulate and keep it nice and warm. Well, a little while ago, when RJ, my son, was real little, we went to the mall, and he had a big shaggy mop of hair, and he was like, Mom, can I get a haircut? I was like, yeah, of course. So there was cartoon cuts, and he went in. He was like, I'm going to go for the summer, and I'm going to get a sports cut. And so he cut all of his hair down and buzz cut it all the way. And he comes out into the mall, and he goes, oh, it's cold out here. I was like, excellent. He was like, what? I was like, because that is a perfect example of how hair can be used for insulation. So us ladies, when we've got this long hair and we're at the beach and it's really hot, what do? We lift it up and put it into a top knot, or when we're cold, we might put it down to act like a scarf. So it insulates and it works very well. But there is another thing that happens when we're cold. Have you ever noticed that your hair sticks up on end when you're cold, like your arm hair? Well, why is that? Well, okay, let's give it a try. Take your arm and make sure that it's open and give a blow across. And the area where you blew across, it got colder, right? So now I want you to put your fingers up on the inside of your arm and blow again. That area that you just blew against didn't get as cold. Why? Because these fingers were there acting as a barrier. So when the air and the ambient air wafts against our skin, it wicks away our temperature. But if we have our hair sticking up on end, it acts like a trap of air against our skin, and it prevents the ambient temperature from being extracting away our body temperature and helps keep us insulated. So clever. Now, hair can also be used for camouflage. Think about a Bengal tiger, right? You can hardly see them if you're looking in the grasses and they're there and the stripes and it all blends in. Or think about the poor zebra it's trying to eat. All of that camouflage, those hairs camouflage it to make it look like one massive organism. Do we have camouflage? Not so much as humans, but we certainly do have it in our other mammalian counterparts. Okay, how can hair be sensory? Well, think about the whiskers on a dog, on a cat. Those whiskers are there to pick up electrochemical signals, vibrations. They're also there for balance and for making sure that they don't get stuck in anything, depending upon how they move backwards and forwards. I said they're used for balance, so why don't we have them? Well, I don't have whiskers. You don't have whiskers. Where did those hairs go? They went into our ears. So there's hair inside our ears that inside the cochlea, there's fluid that's moving them. And depending upon how much these move as our head moves, it allows us to understand where our equilibrium is and allows us to understand what's up, what's down, what's left, what's right. Sensory devices, absolutely. Although we don't have whiskers, we have that in our ear and in other places, like if somebody comes up behind you, your hair goes up on end, right? If there's lots of wind blowing my hair around, I sense that it's windy. Okay. How about waterproofing? Well, I like to think about the otters that live in the water like 22 hours of the day. And they don't get cold, they don't get pruny. Why not? Because that hair prevents the water from coming against the skin and making it wet. Well, why is that going to be important? Well, if it gets wet, it's going to wick our temperature away even quicker. Right, Well, what about us? Have you ever noticed that if you go in the shower, you have to kind of move your hair around in order to get it wet and to wash your scalp and all of that? Well, that's because your thick layer of hair helps to prevent the water from getting to your head. And if 20% of your body heat is lost from your head, and let's say you got caught in a rain shower, if it got wet, it would get cooler quicker. And so this hair helps to waterproof it, which is really good. So we don't have to be an aquatic mammal like an otter, a sea otter. We can see this waterproofing on us as it is. Pretty cool. Signaling. How can hair be used for signaling? Well, there is lots of reasons. So I like to think of the white-tailed deer. Okay, I'm going to come back to pheromones in a second. White-tailed deer. As if you've ever seen a deer, it's got brown all over, and then its tail is brown on one side, but as it flips it up, it's white underneath, so that they can follow each other through the forest, and they can say follow the leader with their little white tails going up because the rest of it camouflages so well into the background of the forest. But these can help. How about us? Do we have signaling? Well, have you ever seen somebody play with their hair when they're bored? Have you ever seen somebody lift their eyebrows? So our eyebrows can be used for signaling. Our hair playing, how we do our hair, absolutely. These can be done for signaling. Even the growth of hair, so facial hair, pubic hair, underarm hair, this is signaling sexual maturity. A lion's mane, think about it, how big their mane is. Well, little lion cubs, they don't have a big mane. That grows when they reach sexual maturity. Same as us, we get pubic hair and the like for when we reach sexual maturity. Now, have you ever noticed that in movies, teen movies, or if you've ever looked down the hallway, that if there is a cute guy coming or whatever, that there might be a girl that's going, oh, 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 and they're flicking their hair around. Why? Well, the reason is that word, pheromones. These are our scent hormones that waft out to be attractive to a mate. So girls, we release a lot from our hair. That's why when we flick our hair and we do our hair, we're sending out these pheromones into the world saying, smell me, I'm gorgeous, don't you love me? I'm a perfect specimen. But, gentlemen, think about Gaston. He stands with his hands on his hips hips and his legs slightly ajar, because most of the pheromones for a guy comes from under the arms, the chest, and the groin. And so they stand in a manly pose saying, "Smell me, I'm a man." And these pheromones get wafted out. So you've heard of love at first sight. Well, it's wrong. It's love at first smell. And it is an unconscious or subconscious thing where you smell someone and you're like, they're quite a bit of all right. And the other person smells you and goes, and then that's love at first sight when you meet and but actually it's the smell of your pheromones that are signaling for attraction. And how does hair work with that? Because those hairs are trying to waft it around and be like, smell me. All right. Hair can be used as defense. Now, I don't mean braid up your hair and use it to hit somebody. Defense, we've got mammals such as porcupines or hedgehogs. Their quills are there as defense mechanisms. Now, we had a hedgehog, a pet hedgehog for a while, Mr. Bert Pricklesworth, and pardon the pun, but he was a pointless pet. He was annoying. He was nocturnal, so he was awake during the day. Awake during the night, and he would run on his wheel that would squeak, and he would run in his own poop, and he would smell, and yeah, we did not have a very good interaction with Mr. Burt Fricklesworth, but he was very defensive. So my doggy at the time thought, oh, what is this? And when I brought the hedgehog home, he would sniff it, and then he poked it with his nose, and the hedgehog rolled into a ball, poked my poor doggy in the nose, and my dog never attempted to go after it again. It is also defense, self-mechanism defense. Not only does it prevent itself from getting eaten, but it bit my finger, and well, this hedgehog wouldn't let go, and it flew across onto the bed because we were in my daughter's room, and it flew across on the bed, and it rolled up into a little ball, and it was perfectly fine because, again, these modified hairs, these quills were there to help protect it. So not only is it protecting itself against predators, but also against tumbles and falls. Well, do we have any hair for defense? Yes. Okay, how about your eyelashes? How about your hair up your nose? Oh, yeah, that's there for defense. It helps to trap stuff, to prevent it from going into our body. So, yeah, we've got defense mechanisms. Cool. So, these are our key functionalities of hair that we can see in the mammalian groups and also in us humans. Now, what's really interesting about your hair is that it is the same protein as in your nails. This protein is keratin. Now, well, how does that work? Well, it's based upon how the proteins are folded together as to how it makes the structure. So it's the same ingredients, but how it's folded and how this protein is then generated and then utilized by the body affects it so that it could be this nice soft hair or nails. There is a really weird genetic, and it's really, really rare, really weird genetic uh, disruption whereby all of your body hair comes out as nails. Could you imagine your eyelashes being nails? Your hair on your arms coming out as nails? They have to trim and clip them, or very painful, very bad. Okay. But don't worry, it's not going to happen to you if you don't already have it. And it's really rare, but I just think it's pretty cool because, again, it's the same protein. Now, if you've got a doggy or a cat at home, you've got a little bit of homework. I want you to go pet them. And as you pet them, I want you to brush them and have a look at their hair. Because what you'll notice is they've got long hair and then they've got little short hair underneath. Just like I've got long hair here, but I've got short ones right underneath, right? Why? Because the short ones are there for insulation and the long ones are there to protect the shorter hairs, which are pretty cool. So we have it too, but you can go look on your dog or your cat. Okay, see if you can come up with the 6 functions of hair. Okay, so there are some other shared characteristics that go along with being a mammal. Now, these other shared characteristics are for all mammals, but they're also for other organisms as well. But we need to talk about them. Okay, so Being endothermic means that we regulate our own body temperature. How? By metabolism, by generating all of these chemical reactions inside our body, and this generates heat. Cool. So we generate our own internal heat. But that means that we have to also regulate when we get too hot or when we get cold. So we maintain the same. Cool. How do we do that? Well, if you get really hot, your face might flush. You might notice that you get red cheeks. That's because the blood vessels get closer to the surface of the skin to allow for the heat to dissipate and to be wicked away. You also notice that you sweat. Oh, it's very hot. Okay, this is where, if you've got a clean hand, I would like you to do it. Blow on the back of your hand. Now give it a little lick and blow on that wet spot again. Ooh, did you notice that it gets colder? Well, you should if you did that. That is because the wet temperature will wick away and extract more of that heat because of a wet surface. That's why our head gets insulated with this hair for waterproofing. Okay, so this brow here, why do we have such a big brow? Why do we sweat from our forehead? Well, think about it. If our brain gets too hot, that's going to be a big problem. So we lose 20% of our body heat from our head, but we need to make sure we lose it so we don't overheat it. So we've got this nice forehead to help dissipate the heat if need be. Okay, so if we're hot, we sweat, we might get rosy, but that doggy in the picture there, do you realize that it doesn't sweat? Well, it will sweat a little bit from the pads of its feet, from in between its paws, only when it's really, really hot. So if your dog's leaving footprints and it hasn't been in a puddle and it hasn't jumped in the swimming pool, that dog's hot. You need to give it some water and get it inside in some air conditioning. But the other times, well, dogs don't sweat. So what do? They pant. So this is where you might look silly, but that's all right. It is only me and I'm a recording looking at you. So you do it. Okay. So what are you going to do is you're going to breathe with your tongue either sticking out or just partially and breathe over your tongue and see what happens. Did you notice that your tongue gets cooler? Well, what color's your tongue? Your tongue's really red or pink. Why? Because it has a huge blood supply. And so as you're drawing this air over this tongue, it cools down the blood and gets circulated around the body to lower your body temperature. Pretty marvelous. But what happens if your tongue's out? It's going to dry out. So what do dogs do? They slobber a lot. And it makes their tongue wet and it keeps it so that they've got a wet surface in order to draw this air over and cool their body down. Genius. But if you're cold, you don't want to sweat. You don't want your blood vessels to come to the surface. So your blood vessels actually constrict and move away from the surface of the skin. That's why your lips might turn a little blue. It's because the light has to go further to hit the blood vessels, and then we see it as a different wavelength. So that's why it looks blue. Cool. Well, what's shivering? Shivering is your muscles contracting and rubbing against each other. Well, where's that going to warm you up? Well, as the muscles contract, it has to use up energy to make the muscles contract, and that releases some heat as a byproduct. But more so, okay, take your hands, put them together, right? Now go. What do you notice? Do you notice that the hands get hot? Ooh, why? Friction. Now, inside your muscles, they're fibers that are rubbing against each other as they contract or pull and release, pull and release. They rub against each other and cause friction. And this friction, therefore, generates an internal temperature of heat to warm you up. Hooray! So why is it that we need endothermic regulation? Well, the best thing is we can live anywhere. We're not dependent upon our environment. So imagine a snake. We don't get snakes in Antarctica. Why not? Because it's too cold. How about our lizards right here? If you remember, if you go outside, you'll see little lizards that run around. Well, if they get really hot, they go in the shade and they cool off a bit. And if they get cool, they come out into the sunshine or they bask on a little rock. And that's because they're not endothermic, which means we generate our heat from inside, but rather they're exothermic. relying upon the outside environment. So, by the fact that we're able to regulate our own body temperature without being reliant upon the external environment, means we can live anywhere. Well, what's our body temperature? You've probably been told it's 98.6. What? 98.6 bananas? No, it's 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. But if you notice here, there is a little extra. Okay, so this is talking about sample size. So in the beginning, when you had somebody taking your temperature, they had a small amount of people that they tested the temperature and they averaged it and they said, well, it's 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. Well, cool. Well, what do you get every time you go to the doctors? You get your temperature taken. And this happens every year at your doctor's appointments, every sick visit. Every time you go to a doctor, you get your temperature taken. Well, they took all of that information and they looked and they're like, some people run a little hotter than that. Some people run a little cooler than that. So they amended our body temperature. And they say it's now 98.6 plus or minus 0.4 degrees Fahrenheit. Remember, every number must have a unit. Okay, otherwise I'm assuming you're going to say bananas. 98.6 plus or minus 0.4 degrees Fahrenheit. Why is this important? Why do you need to know this? Well, okay, for me, I run cold. So my body temperature usually runs about 98.2, 98.3. So that means that if I got a fever, my fever might be 99.0, and that's a big jump for me. That's like 99.2, that's a whole degree. That would be indicative of a fever. But another person, they may run hot, and so they might be 99.0. And for me, that would be a fever, but for them, that's normal. So, how do you know what your temperature is? Well, every time you go to the doctors, ask, what temperature did you get for me? What was my blood pressure? You're responsible for knowing your stuff, which is an important thing. Okay. All right. So, see, what do you mean by this? So, another way that we have commonality between mammals and other organisms is through our feeding and digestion. But it's important to remember that it changes based upon what we eat. Our diet will influence both our teeth and also our digestive system. Remember that we have different types of diets for our mammals. They could be an insectivore like an anteater, or they could be herbivores like a cow, carnivores like a lion, or omnivores like us. And we'll go through each of those in a minute. But why do we need to have this process of eating? Why do we eat? Well, the whole process is to get the nutrients into our body. Not only nutrients, but also energy, the raw material to allow us to move, to talk, to do internally and externally. And this is for our metabolism. Metabolism is the sum of all chemical reactions within the body. So we need to have energy in order to allow for metabolism to create this endothermic regulation. So it allows us to live anywhere we want at our own body temperature. So, as I said, the digestive system and the dentition is going to match that of the teeth. The diet, so the teeth, the dentition is going to match that of the diet. So let's have a look here. So if we look here, we're going to see that a herbivore, this herbivore is going to, let's say, a cow, moo, right? Its teeth, the dentition, remember, is the collective name for the teeth, they're going to be flat and broad for grinding. Well, why? Well, it's because, well, what do they eat? They eat grass, and grass is just plant material. Now, what's so special about plants? Well, the big thing about plants is that they have no bones. My grandmother used to sing a song, I like bananas because they have no bones. And I honestly thought that she made this song up, but it's not. It's just a real song, and it's true. Bananas have no bones, and yet they don't run through my fingers like ooey gooey mess. Certainly not a nice yellow banana. Why not? Well, it's because of their cell wall. they have cellulose in their cell wall, which allows for it to have rigidity and structure and allows it to grow really tall without having any bones in it. Because if not, oh, could you imagine trying to pile up a whole lot of jellyfish? They'd tumble tumbling down, right? But if you pile up lots of bricks, Lego bricks, they could go into a nice tall tower, like our redwoods, our sequoia trees, big tall towers. But a tumbly tower of jellyfish, not so much. It's not going to stand, right? So our animal cell walls, they don't have a cell wall. They just have a cell membrane, and it's just going to be. That's why we have internal structure of like skeleton or external, an exoskeleton. But the plants themselves have an internal structure called cellulose. And this cellulose is going to make the cell rigid and strong and allow it to stack up like Lego bricks. Cool. Well, the problem with cellulose is it's really hard to digest, which is why they need to grind it up loads and loads and loads. That's why they chew yum, 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 yum. And they keep chewing and chewing and chewing because they've got to break up the cellulose of this cell. But they are also going to have a really, really long and slow digestive system that contains enormous amount of bacteria. Yes, I know this is a horse, not a cow, but I wanted to point out their enormously large cecum, which is this purple bit over here. This is which holds enormous amount of bacteria to hold everything and allow it to be broken down by the bacteria. So the big thing about the herbivorous diet is they eat only plants. They've got flat grinding teeth to allow to have the mechanical breakdown of the cells, and then engage in the use of a load of bacteria in order to break down the cellulose to release it, and it takes a long time. So that's why it has a very long and slow digestive system. Conversely, let's talk about a carnivore, such as a lion, right? Look at those teeth. They look a little different, don't they? Yes, well, those teeth are really sharp and they're there for ripping and shredding and, of course, killing their prey, because a carnivore is not going to be eating a salad. It eats meat and meat only. So it needs to have the ability to catch the prey, rip the meat from the bones, and be able to eat it like that. Now, the other thing about a difference is that in a carnivorous diet, they have a very, very, very short and quick digestive system. They do not want fermentation, not for fermentation, right? They don't want fermentation. The fermentation is where you have bacteria to break it down and it's going to produce loads of gas. Well, carnivores want the process of meat to go through their system really, really quickly and not produce gas. That's not their thing, right? So, really important, short and quick fermentation. Okay, not for fermentation, quick processing of the meat. Okay, last one that we're going to talk about is going to be an omnivore. And an example of an omnivore would be us, right? We eat both plant material and animal material. So we have both, like we described, that we'll describe a little bit further later. So, plant and animal material. So, our teeth, we've got a mixed bag here. Run your tongue around from the back to the front and back again. You'll notice that you've got a mixture of flat grinding ones in the back and you get some sharp ones here. Why? Because we have a mixed diet. We eat both plant and animal and need those two types of teeth. So we have a medium lengthed intestine. Our bacteria are required and we have a small cecum, but our digestive system is shorter than a herbivore but longer than a carnivore. Okay, so all right, we talked about energy. So we eat it, but why? Well, let's talk a little bit further, and it all begins with the sun. Well, that sun sends its rays down. And, well, can I just go out in the sun and go, oh, and pick up all of the food and be full? The answer is no, right? I can't do that. But thankfully, my tomato plants can. And they can pick up the sun rays and they photosynthesize and they convert that beautiful sun's rays into energy storage compound called sugar or glucose, right? So this is the equation for photosynthesis. Very important. So the plant takes in the atmospheric carbon dioxide and then it sucks up water through its roots, and with the magic of that sunlight and the help with the chloroplast and chlorophyll and all that good stuff, it is going to go and produce glucose, this sugar molecule. And really importantly for us, it gives off oxygen so that us that are needing to breathe have some oxygen supply. Cool. All right. Well, how does that help me? Well, it might help this snail. So if I zoom in onto that tomato plant, onto its leaf, I might see a snail, and that snail is going to eat. It's got some teeth in there, rows of teeth called a radula, and you can actually hear a snail eat. It's kind of cool, and it eats the leaf, and it digests there. And yum! So it's taken some of the energy from the plant that took the energy from the sun. Only 10% goes into the snail. Well, that snail, might find a chicken. That chicken might like to eat that snail. Oh, but then so might this family like to eat that chicken. Oh, look at that Kentucky Fried Garbage. All right, so chicken could go in that. So again, the sun's rays are going to go into the plant, which goes into the snail, into the chicken, and into the people that are eating the Kentucky Fried Chicken. But what happens if you wanted to, I don't know, eat a salad? Could you? The answer is yes. You would get it directly from the plants because we're omnivorous. We can eat both plant and meat. Or, again, the sunlight goes into the plant, into so on and so forth, and can go into the snail, and then you could eat it as escargot. Oh, look at that. So we could eat anywhere along this food chain. That's very important. So we have multiple avenues to choose from for our food source. But why is that so important? Well, remember this whole food chain business? We got photosynthesis. Well, how does that help me? Well, it's because we have something called cellular respiration. This, my dear friends, is key. In fact, this is the basis for everything that we're going to talk about. I'm going to tell you now, and here's a hint. It's not very much of a secret. This question will be on every single quiz. What? I'm telling you, a quiz question, a test question for your final. What is the formula for cellular respiration? Now, it doesn't have to be balanced like this, but you will have to know that it is glucose plus oxygen yields, that's what that arrow is, carbon dioxide, water, and ATP. You should also know that that stands for C6H12O6 is glucose plus O2, oxygen, yields carbon dioxide, CO2, plus H2O, water, plus ATP. Well, what's ATP? This is the important thing. ATP is adenosine triphosphate. Now, I am not so big on spelling, but this word here, you have to know how to spell. So quite simply, here are two questions that are going to be on your final. What is the formula for cellular respiration? And what is the name of the energy molecule spelled correctly? Ta-da! So adenosine triphosphate. This is important because this is our energy molecule that allows us to have both the mechanical and the exterior movement, as well as all of the movements of everything else that's going on inside our body that's making our body work. Adenosine triphosphate, super, super, super important. Well, that's cool and everything, but question is, what's our ultimate source of energy? Is it the chicken? Is it the plant? Nope. The ultimate source of the energy is the sun, right? But we don't get it directly. We have to get it indirectly through what we eat, which is why it's so important that our digestive system is the way it is. Okay, so there's another question we have to think about. We're an organic life form. Do you know what that means? Have you ever heard of organic chemistry? Do you know why it's called organic chemistry? It is because it is carbon based. So we are a carbon based life form. Well, how do we get the carbon? You were right. We get it from this process right here. Have a look. Where specifically do we get it from? Amazingly, we get it from the atmosphere. So, from this atmospheric carbon dioxide, it goes into the plant. It gets converted through photosynthesis into our carbon rich molecule called glucose, which then comes into us and makes us a carbon based life form. So, our ultimate source of energy comes from the sun, and our source of carbon comes from the atmosphere around us, which makes it really pretty interesting to think that a tree photosynthesizes, but also does cellular respiration in order to generate this oxygen that it then takes back in. This whole cycle keeps going on and on and on, which is really pretty amazing. So, photosynthesis and cellular respiration, they're the opposites of each other. Pretty amazing. All right. Ooh, can you answer this question? How about this question? Okay, let's keep going. So, another shared characteristic with our mammals and other organisms is respiration. Respiration is that we need to have a high amount of oxygen in order to drive our metabolism. I keep using this word again and again and again, and I hope you haven't picked up on the fact that metabolism is the sum of all chemical reactions in the body. So, all our chemical reactions, well, a lot of our chemical reactions require oxygen. Oh, what was the main one that we just talked about that required oxygen? Cellular respiration needs oxygen, right? Now, in order to get this oxygen into our body, we have an extra little piece, which is we have a diaphragm. This is a flap of muscle that goes underneath our lungs that help to ensure that we get a huge amount of oxygen delivered into our body, and the carbon dioxide, the waste product of cellular respiration, is exhaled out of the body. And so that's a really important thing. No, it's not the key characteristics. What were the key characteristics? Oh, hair and mammary glands. Okay. But this is another thing that we as mammals have, is that extra oomph to get the air in, because all our chemical reactions are going to be so dependent on the oxygen coming in for cellular respiration. Okay. Ooh, can you get this one? Ooh, another question. Oh, another question. 3 in a row. Let's see if you can go. All right. So let's keep talking our hearts. Okay. So we have a 4-chambered heart. We do now. We didn't originally. Ooh, intrigue. Now, we've talked about that the circulation is going to be our heart, but we also have to include the fact that it also includes our blood vessels, which we already talked about in terms of endothermic regulation, coming closer to the surface of the skin when we're hot, retracting away, constricting when we're cold, dilating when we're hot, constricting when we're cold, right? So it helps to conserve our energy and make sure that we keep ourselves endothermically regulated. But let's go back to our 4-chambered heart. As I said, we didn't always have a 4-chambered heart. When you were a developing embryo, you actually went through the stages of having a 1-chamber, 2-chamber, 3-chamber, and finally we get a 4-chambered heart at about day 50. So 50 days after conception, you then get this 4-chambered heart. Why? Well, it shows the evolutionary progress, number one. And number two, we have a 4-chambered heart because it is the most efficient way of getting the blood to circulate around the body like this. Okay, so let's talk what embryology is. Embryology is the study of a developing fetus to allow us to see evolutionary changes and adaptations. So this fetus, if we look at the very top row, we can see that this on the far right is the human embryo. And it looks very similar to the rest of them that is along the way. That is because at this stage of early embryonic development, you had gill slits and you even had a little tail. Yes, a tail. Now, Over time, as you're growing and developing, that allows the adaptations of evolution to occur. So we reduce the tail, we no longer have gill slits. In fact, there are some people that have an extra teeny tiny little hole right by their ear, and that's a remnant of the gill slits. And there are actually some babies that are born with a tail. This baby was born with a tail a couple years ago. Amazing, right? But most of the time, these have receded and go away, and it allows us to see this evolutionary adaptation to allow us to see how we've grown, adapted, and evolved over time. And we can see remnants and traces of this as the embryo develops. Okay, so embryology, really awesome, helps us to understand where we've been and where we're going. So, see if you know this one. Okay, so let's talk about the brain. The brain in a mammal is incredibly highly complex and developed. Now, it's particularly the cerebrum. That's the main part of the brain. That's the largest part of the brain. The more folds we have, the more ability for us to have neural cognition. Did you know that a koala's brain is practically smooth? Who would have thought? But our brain isn't. Our brain is really wrinkly, really folded, and we've got really good higher order thinking because of that. But we have the same setup, the same three parts. We have the cerebrum, which is the main part. We have the little cerebellum, which is at the back of the brain. And then we have the spinal cord, or the brain stem, that attaches to the spinal cord down the rest of it. Now, the parts of the brain we'll go into in great detail later, but I want you to realize that there are three parts to it, and that look how wrinkly it is. Well, those wrinkles are really important because that, as I said, increases our ability to have higher order thinking. So the ridges are the ridges, right? And the sulci are the valleys. You sulk down low in the valleys. So repeat that to yourself a couple times. Ridges, are ridges, and you sulk down low in the valleys, right? The sulci go down. Okay, so why are they so important? Because the more wrinkly it is, the higher order thinking we have, and the better we're going to be able to compute and understand and talk. So it doesn't matter how big the brain is. So think about an elephant's brain compared to our human brain. Elephants are pretty smart, but we're smarter. Why? Because we got more wrinkles. Okay. Now, another thing that's really important is that there is a hole in the back of our skull. Go ahead, lift up your hair if you've got hair, run your fingers up the back of your neck and to the base of your skull, and you'll find a hole. Did you know it was there? Whoa. Now, this hole is called the foramen magnum, okay? This is very important for evolutionary evidence, okay? So this hole is where our brain stem, that part that connects to the spinal cord, it goes through. So our brain has to connect, because if it didn't, all right, if I had my brain and I had this, like, where is it going to go through? So there has to be a hole to allow for my spinal cord to connect through to attach to the brain stem, right? Now, the location of where this was has moved over time. So a wolf is a four-legged animal, and its foramen magnum is on the back, so if it's on the same plane. But over time, ours moved, which has now caused us to have I'm going back here, to a C-shaped brain, whereas a wolf or any other four-legged animal is all on one plane. It's all horizontal, but we have a curved brain to allow us to walk on two legs. It allows us to be bipedal. Now, why is this so important? Well, if we look at a quadruped, like this sheep, if it were to stand up, look what happens. Because of the angle of the neck, it is going to be looking up. Well, that's not going to do it any good. It's going to get blinded, right? And it's not going to see if there's a predator that's coming by to eat it. That's not so good. So as it stood up and allowed us to move from being a quadruped, four legs, into being bipedal, the point of where this foramen magnum has moved from here to here. And again, the point of this is it shows and proves our evolutionary adaptation to being bipedal, walking on two legs. Quad, the prefix of quad means four, bi, two. Ped, feet. Ooh. Okay, last shared characteristic is we're going to talk about reproduction. So, all mammals have internal fertilization. Well, what's the alternative? That's external fertilization. So, there are some pros and cons with both. With internal fertilization, there is a lot more protection. But at the same time, there's the hindrance of you only got room for 1 or 2, maybe 14 if you're a rat, space for babies. So your numbers are limited. Genetic variability, again, limited. Typically, it's only going to be one male, one female that are mating. Whereas in external fertilization, I want you to think of like fish finding Nemo, right? They laid a huge clutch of eggs that were fertilized. But what happened? They got eaten, except for poor Nemo. Or they could have multiple partners that fertilized multiple things. But again, the big thing is that they were in water, so they're restricted. Whereas internal fertilization, we're not. So there are definitely pros to being internal fertilization, and evolution has changed so that we as mammals all have internal fertilization. You can look at this chart a little bit further. But let's keep talking. So reproduction, all mammals have internal fertilization, but please notice it says most mammals have an embryo that develops in the female's uterus. Not all, most. And most have a placenta. Oh, is anybody going, well, what doesn't? Remember that a placenta is going to be the part that is connected between the baby and the mother, and the baby and the umbilical cord. So baby, umbilical cord, placenta, and this connects to the mother so that the mother puts in all the stuff, nutrients for the baby into the placenta that get sucked up by the umbilical cord. And the baby then puts all the waste back into the placenta, which then gets absorbed by the mother. And so the mother is now able to excrete and get rid of the waste for the baby, and at the same time deliver good stuff to the baby, like oxygen and nutrients and energy and so forth, glucose. Okay. But not all mammals have this. But all mammals produce milk from their mammary glands after they've been born. And that, remember that word we talked about, lactation. Why all? Because they're all mammals, and the two key characteristics that make a mammal are hair and mammary glands. And these are functional mammary glands that produce milk for the developing offspring through a process called lactation. Okay, now if it's only most mammalians that are placental, what are the others? Well, this is the key part that defines how a mammal is defined based upon their reproduction. There are 3 types. I said we've got placentals. I wonder if you can think of the other 2. Well, I'm going to tell you. They are monotremes and marsupials. So monotremes, these are going to be things like duck-billed platypus that look like this, or echidnas that look like this. And these are going to lay eggs. Yeah, I know, weird, right? They lay eggs, but even after the baby has hatched from this egg, it is still going to get milk from lactation from these mammary glands of these organisms. A marsupial would be something like a marsupial would be something like a kangaroo. That's monotreme. Marsupial, a kangaroo, a wombat, a wallaby, a sugar glider. You might have had a sugar glider as a pet. These are marsupials, and there's one more. Oh, there it is. The Possum. The possum is the only North American marsupial. So, what's the big deal with the marsupials? They have a pouch and a very, very, very short gestational period. Gestation is the length of time that the mother is pregnant for. So, this possum is only pregnant for about 16 days, and the baby comes out about the size of my pinky nail, really teeny tiny. It crawls up the fur from the vagina and it flops into the pouch, and it attaches to a nipple and it suckles on this nipple for about 6 months. Now, this poor little mummy possum can get pregnant again, and then these possums, once they're to about size, they're going to crawl onto her back, and she's got to teach these possums how to eat, where to live, how to forage, so on and so forth. And all the meantime, they keep popping in and out of her pouch, suckling on the milk. And she's had it. So in the middle of the night, she gets fed up and she goes out to a part of the wood she's never been before. And with all her might, she shakes and babies go flying in every direction off her back and she scampers away. Whee! And now, well, she could have another litter. But that's how this mother possum does it. Whoa. So most marsupials are going to be from Australia. So if you look at Australia and Papua New Guinea, they kind of fit in like a jigsaw puzzle, and Tasmania. And so this had geographical isolation. Oh, I hope you're remembering these words from biology: geographical isolation for evolution, and that's how they became with these pouches. The last one is a placental mammal, and this is going to be us. We have a placenta whereby we have this growing sac that is connecting. Inside the sac, there is this placenta that connects to the baby, that delivers the nutrients and extracts away the waste products. And you can see on this poor little baby elephant, I think it was a stillborn, you can see the umbilical cord, and you can see how it is connected to the placenta, which was connected to the mother's uterus to supply all of the nutrients and take away all of the waste. So again, the key method here is that their types of mammals are separated by how they reproduce, whether they lay eggs like a monotreme, whether they have a pouch and very short gestation like a marsupial, or that they have a placenta like us. But there are other key characteristics that we share with other organisms that we've just talked about. But the two key defining characteristics that make a mammal are hair and mammary glands. Okay, if you've got any questions, please let me know. But here endeth the talk on mammals.